Hello, it's Amy Zaby with the Friday, January 20th Jerusalem Report Red Alert, and it is Inauguration Day in America. Now, most Americans are looking for a new hope as we have a new president. While not everybody necessarily was rallied behind the persona of Mr. Donald Trump, most Americans, a majority of U.S. states, voted for the platform that he stood for. And this was despite biased press that not only rallied against the Republican Party for decades, it also rallied harshly against Mr. Trump, and yet he won decidedly among the 50 United States. As we look forward, we have to remember that just recently in 2016, the UN passed a very scathing condemnation against the state of Israel for its so-called settlements in the West Bank as the so-called proposed obstacle to Middle East peace. Also want to recollect that last month Mr. Kerry said publicly, our then Secretary of State, that in a condescending lecture to our Israeli allies, that he noted that one cannot be Jewish and democratic at the same time. If ever a person needed a basic comparative religion course and a lesson on democracy and its ideals, it would be Mr. Kerry. So let's step back and remember a decade or so ago how we have a historical proof that West Bank settlements or any settlements of Israel is not the major hindrance to the peace process. And in fact, the Palestinians are their own worst enemy when it comes to the peace process. Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip unilaterally. I was in Israel just 2 or 3 years after this happened, and I met with Israeli families who were still living in hotels because their homes, the homes that they built and paid for, were seized by the Israeli government and either demoed or deeded back to the then leadership in Gaza. Now, what did the Israelis get for this concession? To give Gaza as a self-ruled area for the Palestinians. They had democratic elections and voted for themselves into power, and I don't know if that vote was legitimate or not, could have been corrupt, the Hamas leadership into their democratic power. Moreover, the quality of life for Palestinians, Arabs in the Gaza Strip went down significantly as the corrupt government took over resources and inserted oppressive regimes on the people, including the Christian Palestinians that live in that area. Moreover, the neighboring Israeli towns that remained Israeli, Sderot, for example, and others in the Negev desert, have endured 12 plus years of tens of thousands of rocket launches, extensive property damage and devaluation of property, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder, as there's a generation of children who are growing up learning how to run to bomb shelters and be within 30 seconds of bomb shelters at bus stops and in every schoolyard and in every community park. This is what withdrawing from so-called occupied territories has left the Israelis with: an increased threat against civilian populations and no efforts of peace by the Palestinians. So this is why Mr. Netanyahu does not agree with the UN, nor do most Americans, that this UN condemnation in December of 2016 was at all legitimate, and that the West Bank settlements of Israelis who provided great economic infrastructure to the area as well as improved quality of life for all inhabitants, that this Israeli president has anything to do with the roadblocks to the peace process. It is in fact the anti-Semitic and genocidal attitude of the Palestinian leadership that is the opposition to peace process. Now, how does this feed the BDS movement I often speak about? The boycott, divest, and sanction movement that opposes Israel on college campuses and amongst the arts and within community and political and economic organizations worldwide. Well, the BDS movement sees this UN condemnation as a way to legitimize its own stance that Israel, again, is the enemy to peace in the Middle East. But 2017 is bringing new resolve with our new administration taking hold this very day. There are swelling efforts in the UK, in Britain, and in France to support Israel. Just last week, we had a terrorist attack in Jerusalem where 15 people were mowed down by a truck, many died, and the Israeli flag was projected onto many historical sites in Europe, including in Berlin and in France. So this is a renewed sense of solidarity with the Jewish people who are always suffering from terrorist acts, as they too have suffered from terrorism extensively in the last few years. I want to remind the outgoing administration of Ezekiel 33, verse 6. But if the watchman sees war coming and doesn't blow the trumpet, warning the people, and war comes and takes anyone off, I hold the watchman responsible for the bloodshed of the unwarned sinner. I feel that America in the last 8 years was not the watchman Israel needed and was not the helper that Israel needed for its security. Verse 11 goes on, tell them, as sure as I am a living God, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. I want the wicked to change their ways and live. Turn your life around, reverse your evil ways. This means that even though we work against organizations and people who slander or have a bias against Israel and seek to nullify its existence, our goal as Christians should not be just to deaden this effort, but our goal as Christians should be to turn the hearts of those people. Nobody has pleasure from the death of the wicked. The goal is to change their ways and live. This is what God would love to see, and this is what we should do as His agents on earth with the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, the BDS movement has to continue this drumbeat of all things Israeli or from Israel are bad, and that all things Jewish are tainted. And in these pronouncements, they've hidden themselves from the truth of not only what Israel has provided to the inhabitants of the land in terms of innovations, cultivations of the land, quality of life for all these people. They've also blessed the entire world with medical and technological advances that none of us could possibly divest ourselves in unless we wanted to go live in the forest in a cave with no cellular technology, no amenities of any kind of modern materials, and certainly no access to any innovative medical care, many of which have origins and contributions directly from Israeli innovations. It reminds me of Romans 15:27. They were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with their material blessings. I feel like this is almost coming about in a round circle, that we as the West, as Christian nations and nations of all religions, are benefiting from the material blessings of the Israelis. We too should share in our spiritual blessings in the form of a solidarity with them. The relationship between Jewish people, Israelis, and members of nations around the world who are Christian must continue to recognize the responsibility that we have to each other. That the core of many modern societies of the West, the idea of freedom, truth, and justice, are derived from our Creator, that people should not experience injustice or human rights violations, and that we should help each other, and that nobody should be targeted simply for who they are, especially when they've not instituted any harm against another. Remember that God commanded in the Old Testament that Israel be a beacon of truth to all of the land, that it was to treat its neighbors and all foreign inhabitants with justice and hospitality. These edicts from centuries ago are ingrained in the Jewish culture and in the Israeli culture and in the Israeli government's policies and laws and policies around the region. And in so doing, we cannot let the bullies of the world, the UN and the BDS movements, continue a generations-old grudge that they have against them to eliminate the Jewish presence from the map. In this, we hold our 2017 resolution with our newly inaugurated President Donald Trump and his administration, that we will be that watchman for Israel, and that we will share in our blessings, material and spiritual, to have their back. Shavua Tov, have a great week, and Shabbat Shalom.